Welcome everyone, I'm Alexandra Karakas from Budapest, Hungary. I'm a PhD student and the title of my talk today is Malfunction Notion in AI and Design. Malfunction is an exciting concept in design and technology as well as in biology, as malfunction doesn't tell you what an artifact or an organ in case of biology does, but on the contrary, it tells you what the artifact doesn't do or couldn't do at the moment. A malfunctional projector is not displaying the laptop screen, a pen drive doesn't show any data, and the refrigerator is not cooling. What's common in these cases? There is at least one supposed functional feature that users expect the artifact to fulfill, and for some reason the object cannot meet these expectations. I use the term function as a concept that refers to the activity or activities of what the artifacts are both designed for and treated by the user, and at the same time describes the artifact's means to an end nature, and thus it gives an explanation of the nature of the object. Although at first sight, malfunction, especially from a user's perspective, seems to be a simple concept, but in reality, in both philosophy of technology and engineering, failure is a wide-ranging phenomenon. Malfunction can refer to several different anomalous scenarios, including poor design, manufacturing mistakes, unexpected features, and unplanned user reaction. With physical artifacts, malfunction in the majority of the cases is easier to notice, even if we cannot understand what caused the malfunction. But in software design and AI, failure can be much more complicated. However, what exactly malfunction is the question. And as per usual, there are many different definitions out there. Martin Franzen gives a precise definition about malfunction that states that X is a malfunction in K expresses the normative fact that X has certain features F, and that because of these features, if a person P wishes to achieve result of K-ing, then P has a reason not to use X for K-ing. And in my talk today, I use Franzen's definition of the notion of malfunction as a base, and I will focus on malfunction notions in physical objects and contrasting categories such as software design and AI. I argue that malfunction is not just a byproduct of a well-functioning technological artifact or system, but the ability to malfunctioning is an essential feature of artifacts, and that makes them different from natural objects, for instance. In software design, with the advancement of technology, new types of errors appear as well, and failures, and the malfunction taxonomy is much needed in order to make technology sustainable. Some types of errors are computational errors, defects, faults, and failures, logic, data, and syntax errors. The major problem is to distinguish between the cause of an error and an unwanted effect of malfunctional occurrence. Regarding software errors, engineers tend to use the word bug when any error occurs in software, for instance, while in the case of hardware and artifacts in general, failure are usually described as malfunction. So as I described, malfunction explains what the artifact doesn't do, and so at the same time, malfunction statements imply the artifact's supposed function as well. So for instance, a statement like the refrigerator is not cooling implies that the fridge is supposed to be cooling because that is its designed function. But even though malfunction statements in many cases can be simple, these explanations of a particular state of an object contain at least three types of intertwined assumptions. The first is that the artifact stopped working properly for some reason. The second is that the users know very well its intended or proper function. And the third is a normative statement, how good or poor the performance of the artifact, let it be still functioning or an already malfunctioning object. The first and the second claims are descriptive statements regarding how said artifact works, while the third statement regarding the performance of artifacts entails a spectrum regarding how well or poorly the artifact performs its intended function. Now let us take a closer look at the three statements implied in the sentence "the refrigerator is not cooling." The first one is that the artifact stopped working properly for some reason, and this seems to be the most straightforward statement of all of them, but even this evokes many issues. Failure in technology exists in many forms. For instance, there's gradual degradation or graceful degradation, when an artifact doesn't stop working immediately but slowly starts to operate on a lower but still acceptable level of quality. In technology, graceful degradation means a reduced service. Thus, the artifact would still work, but the user would only have access to a reduced set of features, or the operating of the object would be significantly slower, or even some function would be disabled in order to keep the object operating. There are many examples of this in software design and technology in general. But if there are no built-in mechanisms to achieve graceful degradation, that would lead to sudden and complete failure. The ability to do this called fault tolerance or fault tolerant design, and the aim of it are to have an operating artifact even when some parts of the object are broken. The second implication is that we users know very well the intended function of the artifact, and the concept of proper function was originally developed by Ruth Millikan in the book titled Language, Thought and Other Biological Categories in 1984, but later on it was adopted by many researchers from different fields who investigate the nature of artifacts and the notion of function. The term proper function, in simple words, refers to what the artifact or a biological device in Millikan's is meant for. Millikan argued that having a proper function is a matter of having been designed to or of being supposed to perform a certain function. Her method is to analyze language, biological devices, instinctive behaviors, and artifacts with the same theory from a functional point of view. And so she states that artifacts and biological devices can be analyzed the same way. This model is quite influential in design and technology, and it was later extended by many authors like Fermat and Hooks, arguing that etiological accounts such as Millikan's account that work for biological items, biological devices, are not suitable for explaining man-made objects or technical artifacts. Their function theory also relies on proper function as a standard feature of human-made objects, and they describe, Fermat and Hughes describe the term as something standardly attributed to artifacts. As opposed to proper function, Fermat and Hughes also use the term accidental function, referring to scenarios that seldom happen. Describing the proper function or the proper functions of an artifact is a theoretical and practical problem at the same time. And in order to make statements like the fridge is not cooling, the user needs to have a fixed concept about the nature of said object. But of course, the fridge example is a straightforward and easy to understand instance, but as with many theoretical problems, the topic gets more and more complicated as we take a look at more examples and the smaller details of the model. Having a proper function implies that the object has at least one improper function as well. Although a crucial factor in any function theory is to decide on whether or not to consider significant how the user treats the object, because that's sometimes the opposite of what the designer wanted to achieve. And this is a common problem actually with intentionalist function theories, whether or not to include the user's intention or to what extent both the designer's and the user's intention will make a difference in the artifact's proper function. If the user adds new functions now and then to an object, for instance, practical purposes or symbolic meanings, that has to be covered in the proper and improper dichotomy as well. A well-known example that has been used by many authors like Beth Preston and Danielle Dennett is about chairs. At first sight, chairs are relatively simple artifacts. Everyone knows how a chair looks, even though chairs have many different forms. Their proper function is to sit on them, but often we use them as ladders to reach higher. Although many authors like Sheila argues that this improper use doesn't make standing on chairs proper functions, because that would just collapse the distinction with real ladders. But the problem is that this improper usage raises many important issues about the ontology of function in intentionalist theories. The first problem is the user's entitlement to the artifact and its function. If social factors and the history of a particular object are heavily embedded in the way we encounter objects, why is there no actual influence on the artifact's reception when the users keep adding new functional features to a tool, for example, using a chair as a stepladder or a ladder? In Danielle Dennett's model, using an object for a different purpose than its original function is a form of appropriation, and the designer of an object is not different from an average user in this sense. A major problem in defining proper and accidental functions and with dislocating malfunction lays in this form of appropriation, as Dennett titled it. If someone always uses one particular chair as a ladder because of various reasons, like there's no real ladder, or the chair is small anyway, it's old and dirty, or it just doesn't fit the style of the house anymore, etc., and never uses the item as an actual chair, then why would the proper function of the artifact still be sitting on it even after many years? Now, I don't have time to go into details about this aspect of the topic, but a similar issue appears in art as well when an ordinary object is transformed into an art piece, like in Duchamp's work. What that means is that even though there are clear-cut cases of excellent and also lousy function performances and proper and accidental functions, in most cases, users distribute object performances based on comparisons. How did a similar object perform the same action, for instance? And this leads us to the third and last component of implied in the malfunction statement: the fridge is not cooling. Okay. So as I mentioned before, malfunction exists in many different forms. What's relevant to these third statements is that failure in technology can be subtle and partial, as well as a complete breakdown. And when judging an object's performance, users make normative statements like, this is a bad cell phone, this and that is better in terms of usability. For instance, there are many different, sometimes contradicting aspects of an artifact, and these can lead to divergent normative statements by different users. Thus, malfunction in this framework can be a slippery concept. However, how can malfunction be classified at all is the main question. A standard, not clear, not so detailed differentiation of failures is the ones caused by humans and failures caused by design fail. And as I discussed the second design fail category more today, I want to mention a different approach by Donald Norman. He divides dysfunctions or malfunctions into two separate categories: slips and mistakes. And later on the one hand, Norman defines slips as small things like a misplaced action, a wrong thing moved in place of another one, a supposedly meaningful action undone, and on the other hand, he defines mistakes as significant events that are difficult or even impossible to detect. The main difference between Norman's account of errors and mistakes and the one I present in my talk is that Norman targets human behavior and the thought processes that lead to unexpected human artifact interaction. Thus, Norman focuses more on cognition and the failure of thought rather than on the failure of particular design choices and objects. Summary: in aesthetics, philosophy, design research, and in the philosophy of technology, the problem of defining artifacts is a widely discussed topic. The main question is how can we differentiate natural objects and artifacts, so man-made objects. I argue that the concept of malfunction sheds new light on the differences between these two categories. Biological devices and organs can malfunction as well, but in the context of conscious human use of an object, the notion of malfunction only makes sense when applied to artifacts. Martin Franzen pointed out in an example that we can use a stone as a hammer, but we would not say if it cracked that it's a malfunctioning hammer as we would do if we use the proper hammer. Thus, natural objects can perform the same proper function as other man-made objects would do, but these two types of objects are fundamentally different. With the malfunction concept, I argue that it's easier to lay the foundations of an artifact taxonomy that can account yet unsolved theoretical issues regarding the notion of design and natural objects. Thank you.